All right, everybody, welcome back to the Boardman Black and Gold podcast. We've got our third straight week of our outside perspective today, and we are with a real-life Commanders fan. They do exist, and we are looking at each other right now, and for the third straight week, we have somebody who is repping out their team. Morgan, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, yeah, I'm Morgan. I've grown up my whole life, sadly, a Commanders fan, or Washington fan, I should say, technically. I honestly started out, my oldest brother, Aaron, was a huge Washington fan. That definitely influenced me. And then my dad is like one of the world's biggest Cowboys fans. So it made it really interesting at our house for many years when it got to that couple game weeks. But yeah, so on the struggle bus for most part of my life, having a great year this year. I'm feeling great.
My first question for you was like, how are the vibes right now? I mean, I feel like they have to be pretty good.
You know, Zane, the vibes are fantastic. The vibes are there. I actually didn't know what this felt like. And then I think it was around week 3 or 4, I was like, oh my gosh, wait, they're not choking. I was like, there's no way this is happening. Jayden Daniels, I love you. Like, it was prime time. I felt like RG3 again, but just with more promise this time.
Well, I hope that it sticks around a little bit longer than RG3, personally.
Me too.
I like Jayden Daniels a lot. I think that there was a little bit of maybe question even as to if you would draft him or not. I mean, when that happened, when you drafted him, what were your initial thoughts on that? Because obviously he's pretty much a lock for Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Oh, yeah. When we drafted him, honestly, I was a little nervous, but also it's just like, if you think of Washington's history with drafting quarterbacks, it makes sense to be nervous because it seems like we always have very short terms of commitment to them. And, like, I remember, like, when we drafted Sam Howell, I was like, okay, like, he's kind of a textbook, like, we'll work him up, but, like, he could be pretty solid. I don't know. I was like, we'll see how it works out. And then when we went away from him, I was like, oh, gosh, what's going to happen? Like, so who are we picking up? But I was excited for Jayden Daniels. I didn't know if he was actually going to start this year because I was like, okay, Marcus Mariota, I guess. Like, I was like, well, throw him in and give Jayden Daniels some time to sit, but he's done great. Ironically, Joseph was the first person to text me after we just drafted Jayden Daniels, and he was like, how do you feel? This is your year.
Well, I don't know if you know this yet, but Joseph and I are actually going to this game. We are going.
Oh my gosh.
We are going to Fedex Field. How many? Actually, I don't know this. How many games have you been to?
I've never gotten to go to a Washington game.
Really?
Which, it's surprising because, like, I already kind of live close-ish to FedEx, and then also just, like, I don't know, the tickets were never that expensive.
Well, yeah.
I mean, until now it's like, oh, shoot. But my dad and I are actually looking at going, we're going to try and go to the Commanders Falcons game, which is shaping up to be a good one, so hopefully we can make it happen.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That hopefully will be my first one.
Okay, awesome. That's a good deal. Well, a very promising offense that you guys have had this season. You're third in yards per game, you're third in rushing yards per game, third in points per game, and you're top half in passing yards game. So obviously Jayden Daniels has been a big part of the success. Talk to me a little bit, maybe as like the surrounding cast around him. Obviously you got a lot of new faces, a couple of returners, but as far as things go, it's a pretty new offense. How has that kind of led to your success this season?
I think one thing that really helped was there was a complete overhaul of the offensive line, which was desperately needed. And they're not where they need to be yet, but they're getting better, and it's better than what it was the past couple seasons. So I think that kind of set the stage. And, like, I don't know, you can see it with different teams across the league, but I think that when you have a team that is mostly new players, they actually gel together better than some of the bigger names, which I think has worked out in our advantage. But I also would love, like, a solid wide receiver, too. Something to pair up with Terry McLaurin. But, like, so looking at that, I think that's kind of helped us. And then also, yeah, Terry McLaurin and then Brian Robinson Jr. are the two guys that I think if you ask most Commanders fan, that's who they were hoping would not leave when we hit our, like, lowest. And especially to see Terry McLaurin happy has been, like, the most wholesome moment, I think, ever in the past couple years for Washington. So I think, yeah, McLaurin, Robinson Jr., and then some of the younger wide receivers are, like, really showing their grit. I mean, they don't have the name to be doing all the things that they've done, but they've gotten consistently good games off of it. And I think that is a large part due to Jayden Daniels just making plays happen. And same thing with kind of bailing out the offensive line sometimes, because Sam Howell was not as mobile as Jayden Daniels, even if he tried to be. And so I think that's been helping him out a lot more, was just his presence there. So yeah, I think that's definitely, some of the smaller names have played more key parts in it than it would if we had just tried to pick up all these receivers that wouldn't gel well together. And it seems like they all kind of came up together at the same time. And then also Cliff Kingsbury has been doing a great job. Yeah. He's gotten some hate, but he's killing it, honestly.
Well, honestly, I mean, the overhaul of the coaching staff as well. Obviously, Dan Quinn is the head coach, a defensive-minded head coach. You kind of wondered coming in if he would be effective at coaching an offense, but from my perspective, it seems like he's completely distributed that role to Cliff Kingsbury. And like the numbers that I read, I mean, he's done really, really well with a lot of talents. But like you said, I mean, Terry McLaurin's kind of the guy. And then after that, there's a pretty substantial drop-off in the wide receiver, too. Olamide Zaccheaus is one name that I see pop up like once a week for like a really, really big play. And as a Steelers fan, you know, we have a pretty decent secondary this year. You know, Joey Porter Jr. is probably going to be following Terry McLaurin all day. But Zaccheaus is one of those guys that I look at, I'm like, are we going to forget about him? Because it seems like there's at least one or two plays every week that teams forget about him, and he takes it for a big chunk.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of looking at for this week, because obviously the Steelers' run defense, and just the Steelers' defense in general is definitely the highlight of the team this year, and it's as it should be. So I do think that the secondary is the big concern, but I think Zaccheaus has done a really good job of slipping into places where he shouldn't be based off the scheme for the past couple weeks. And I also think De'Ami Brown has done a lot better. I didn't think he was going to develop as fast as he had, but he's doing great consistently. He hasn't made like the bigger plays, but he's been kind of a workhorse for when McLaurin is in double coverage or anything like that. So I think watching out for that, but I think, 100% right. I think Zaccheaus is going to be a little sneaky, a little shifty this week.
Brown has only one touchdown, but that touchdown meant a whole lot. Maybe I'm curious to know even just your thoughts on that game. And, you know, if you're unaware of it, then you're living under a rock, because I don't know how you could have missed it. The Hail Mary from Jayden Daniels, throwing it, like 60 yards in the air, gets tipped against the Bears. A good friend of both of ours, Logan. Rest in peace, my brother. I mean, it's a little tough.
R.I.P.
But I mean, run me through your thoughts in that. You know, even just your reactions to that.
So one thing I've learned as being a lifelong Washington fan is sometimes you don't even need to watch a game till the fourth quarter. And by sometimes, I mean all the time. Because it won't matter until we get down to that point. Like, there are so many games that there's been a substantial lead, and then the fourth quarter hits, and it's like everyone on the field forgot how to play. And so I've had a hard time of shaking that this year. And so the Bears game was the first game that I had watched pretty much from the beginning all the way through. And so you get down to that last play, and I'm just like, all right, like, here comes the turn of the season. It was going to happen at any point. And I don't think I've screamed so loud in my life. Everyone's texting, like, sending the video of it. What came out afterwards about the Bears defender that was mouthing off the fans, and then he's the one who was supposed to be covering. Like, that was picture perfect. That was you could not have written that better for a movie. But it was a culmination of just dreams, lifelong dreams for that to happen. Should it have gotten to that point? Probably not. It should have done better to not have to have a Hail Mary to win, but you always love those moments when they do happen. And the Bears are doing really well this year, honestly. Like, they're a solid competitor. It was a great game to watch. So if it had to happen against anybody, I'm glad it was in that competitive of a setting where it was just like, all right, these are two good teams that we're just going to see what happens. Let's just throw it up there and see who can win. So, yeah.
So obviously you have retroactive PTSD from years past. Has that bled into anything this season? Maybe like defensively. Obviously, again, Dan Quinn's been very effective. I looked at a couple of numbers. As far as the defense goes, it's like top 5 in pass defense and bottom 5 in run defense. So how does that work into this coming week against a Steelers team that has rushed for over 100 yards, Najee Harris specifically, for 3 straight weeks? How does that work this week?
It's definitely, I think, defensively the focus has to be on Najee Harris. But when you put it on that, like you think about the trade deadline that just passed, y'all just picked up Mike Williams, and to have him opposite of George Pickens is a scary thought for like any secondary. So it's going to be a bit of a juggling situation for that. But I think that Najee Harris statistically is the person you need to focus on in this case. Because I think Russell Wilson, is he starting this week or is it Justin Fields?
It's pretty much Russ from here on out. Fields has been dealing with like a little hamstring injury. A hamstring injury in air quotes, maybe so we don't have to throw a 4th round pick at the Bears instead of just that 6th round pick that we initially gave up to go get him. So, I mean, it's pretty much Russ from here on out. And I've asked this the last 2 weeks, but if you as a Commanders fan, who would you rather play against, Russ or Fields, based on what you understand from both of them this season?
I think, and this might be a hot take, but I'd rather take Russell Wilson over Justin Fields. And it's solely for the fact that Justin Fields is a little bit more unpredictable than Russell Wilson is. And the things that Wilson is consistent in, it's things that you can prepare for. But with Justin Fields, like he could come out one game and have horrible pass completion ratings and everything like that. And then the next game he could go deep and have 4 touchdowns. Like it's hard to prepare for, I feel like, with Fields versus Russell Wilson. And I think Justin Fields is a little bit more mobile in the pocket than Russell Wilson is. So if we had good pass rushing this week, I think it'll be great against against Wilson. But against Fields, I think it would be a different story because it would be that dual threat to think of him and Najee Harris versus just Najee Harris and Russell Wilson.
Sure. Okay. One more thing too. Oh, I just dropped my notes. There it is. You guys went out and traded for Marshawn Lattimore. What was it, yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. How does that help this week? Is he going to be available this week? What can the Steelers expect from Lattimore this week?
As far as I know, he will be available this week. I don't know how well he's going to gel. I am being optimistic about it. I think that he would do well in the system. I think he'll be a great addition to the team, especially like if you know any Washington fans, you know that Benjamin St. Juste, or just I can't remember how to say his name, is on paper a great corner. But when you get to the big moments in each of these games, he always is the one to miss that impact play. But Marshawn Lattimore brings that quality into it where he's locked down on corner. And so I think that that's something that we need just going out through the rest of the season, but especially with Steelers, because if you look at George Pickens going up and catching balls that you wouldn't think were imaginable, that's something that we're a little bit weaker at in that unpredictable side of it. Whereas our corners, they're fine. They're just not they're not great. They're not that next level that you need to have. So I think if he's starting this week, I think he'll make a big impact on the game. But it's also interesting that he and Mike Williams both ended up on these teams at the same time. So it's going to be a weird trade-off to see how that coverage goes versus that new weapon on offense for the Steelers. But I think he's a necessary addition, honestly, just from what I've seen in the past couple of years.
You guys gave up a pretty decent haul of picks to get him. I think it was a third, a fourth, and a sixth, and I think you also got a 5th rounder in that as well. So, I mean, it seems like Washington at this point is pretty set on being competitive, and they're 7-2 right now. The only thing that I'm a little skeptical on with Washington is they don't have the keystone win quite yet. I think that they're kind of they beat up on the Giants twice. They beat up on the Panthers, and don't get me wrong, these are substantial wins. They're very convincing wins, if that makes sense. But this Steelers week, I think, is a litmus test for Washington, because this is kind of a deal where, okay, now we're facing a team that's well above 500, that has pretty firm playoff aspirations. And from the Steelers' standpoint, too, this is kind of our big test as well.
Right.
So it's kind of this war of attrition. Who's going to blink first and who's going to come out in this game? So I'll ask you, what's your score prediction and who's going to win this game?
Right now, so honestly, my score prediction, I'd probably put it at 28-24, I'd say. And I think it could go either way, honestly. I'm obviously going to be like, Washington's going to win. But, like, I really think it is a toss-up, and it's based off of the performances of the defenses, honestly, in this case, which it's hard to say that when you have Jayden Daniels has been this big, like catalyst for success on the offense, and he's been the big focus of this team, but the defense is doing the grunt work, and if they're going to win, I mean, defense wins football games. That's just point blank period. So I think 28-24 is probably a reasonable game. I think it's going to be one of, if not the best game of the week. In my opinion, it's pretty up there, the matchup. And yeah, like you said, the Keystone wins are important. And in the past, Commanders lost to Tampa Bay. They lost to Baltimore. Those are two big competitors in the league this year. So those losses do kind of weigh heavy versus the other wins that we've had. Like, blowing out the Panthers is not as big a deal as if we were to blow out another team like, the Ravens or anything like that. So I think that it's a good litmus test is a good phrase for that. Yeah, it's a good testing week to see how this works out.
Litmus test is like one of my favorite phrases ever. I don't know when I started using that, but just hey, weighing the odds. What are you made of?
Just gotta throw it out there. We gotta see what you can do.
Yeah,
and this is the time.
That's right. For both teams, especially. Okay, you said 28-24. I'm going to push it again. Who's going to win the game? Because that's what matters the most. You have to be on record and tell me who's going to win the game.
All right. If I have to predict, I'll say Washington, and I'll say it's another similar play as against the Bears, because I think it'll be down to the wire. I think it'll be a last-minute overhaul. So I'll full send on Washington just because I have to stay loyal. But
all right, I love it. Very good. I have one more question to ask because I'm obligated to ask it to every single guest that we have on here. There's a lot of contention between myself and David about Mike Tomlin. We have some very strong opinions on Mike Tomlin, but we do understand that there are outside people that have their own opinions on Mike Tomlin. So, as a Commanders fan, what's your thoughts on Mike Tomlin?
First, I was so excited for this question. I just want to put that out there. I was like, oh, yes, I can answer this. Also, the Steelers are one of the teams that I will always root for, honestly, whenever I see them. Even though I'm not, a big Steelers fan, I'm a Washington fan. You just kind of want them to win, especially with the whole Le'Veon Bell era. I was like, come on, get close. But Mike Tomlin, I think that he's a good coach. I think he is. I think he's statistically consistent, it's impressive in the NFL to get your team into the playoffs so consistently, to get that many wins, especially recently, even with just the quarterback mix-up, coming off of Big Ben and then going to this kind of, twilight zone of quarterbacks showing up and disappearing. It's impressive to still be consistent. But I think his issue where he falters a lot is that he doesn't have the support around him to be a finishing team. It's like he can kind of get you there to the point you need to get the wins or get into the playoffs, but there's a hard time closing on that. And I don't know if that falls on the team, if that falls on him, or if it's a combination of both. It's almost like he doesn't have that quality that motivates people and pushes them past that threshold. Like, you see that quality in Dan Campbell. Yeah. The Lions came out of nowhere. Right. But it's Dan Campbell pushing them to where he knows they can get. So it makes me wonder on that side if Mike Tomlin doesn't push the same way, or if he hasn't found the right way to push in the culture of the team. But I do think, statistically, he's a pretty great coach if you're looking just on paper. But there's more than paper involved in the game of football. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Games are not played on paper. If they were, then nothing would matter. That's why you play the games. Now, one more wrinkle into this. Obviously, it's a very small sample size with Dan Quinn. Who would you rather have as your head coach right now?
Considering the fact that we have had our own quarterback limbo until now, I probably would stay with Dan Quinn.
Okay, fair enough.
Just as it's our known variables, we don't know what a Mike Tomlin Washington team would look like, but we know what Dan Quinn's team looks like.
That's true. That's
and
I'm
liking the way it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. No reason to rock the boat right now. 7-2, one of the best teams in the NFL, one of the best teams in the NFC. You're right up there with a team like the Lions, statistically right now, and it's a very good-looking team with a very good-looking offense. And again, I think in this case, if the defense is passable, I think it gives you enough of a shot because I mean, Daniels doesn't have a lot of wrinkles right now. He does not turn the ball over. Your turnover ratio is +5, which is top half in the league. You know, there's a lot of good stuff going on in Washington right now, and I mean, kind of the same idea that you have with the Steelers. I mean, I'm always rooting for Washington because
That's right.
you know I got nothing against them except for that 2020 loss when Chase Young had his breakout game. But I mean that's about it. So you know I like the Commanders, and you know I don't like them this week, but you know once week 10 comes around, I'll start liking them again. So
yeah, it's a mutual dislike this week. Sadly, I hate to be rooting against the Steelers, but I have to this week.
Well, we appreciate the secondary support, if you will. But Morgan, I thank you so much for joining me on this week's Outside Perspective episode. As always, the Boardman Black and Gold podcast is sponsored by Zecca Enterprises, crafting furniture solutions in northwestern Pennsylvania. Call 919-406-4679. And we'll be back after this Commanders week to see which of these two teams wins the war of attrition. The 7-2 Commanders are hosting the 6-2 Steelers. Jayden Daniels, Russell Wilson, who comes out on top? Morgan, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Yes. We'll have to I don't know if down the road how many times we're going to be playing the Commanders, but we might have you back on at some point down the road.
I would be honored. That would be great.
Very good. Well, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening to the Boardman Black and Gold podcast. Hopefully we'll come back after a Here We Go Steelers win, and we will see you next week.